One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I cannot believe that when this episode goes live, it will officially be 1 year since Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast, my book, has launched. Well, technically, this episode airs like one day before the 1 year anniversary, but still, like, I'm just going to be one of those people that celebrates, like, oh, this is my birthday week. Right? We all know those people. Maybe you're one of those people, right? It's like, hey, it's my birthday month. I'm going to celebrate all month. I don't really get that. My birthday's in December, and my birthday's literally 2 days before Christmas. So I've always had this weird relationship with my birthday, feeling like, oh, it might as well just be on Christmas because that's what everybody's always, talking about and celebrating and doing. But this felt extra special to be able to celebrate that my book has been out in the world for a year. So I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to those of you that are thinking about writing a book, creating a book, maybe from your existing podcast content, or it's a dream that you aspire to have down the road. And I just want to share my thoughts around writing a book, launching a book, and the things that I learned whenever I created Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? It was October 20th, 2020, when I launched my book, Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. And I have to tell you, the story of launching this book actually started in around September of 2019. Isn't that crazy? Like 2019, like I think back to it and it feels like, I mean, that's more than 2 years ago at this point when this book inspiration first kind of hit me. And I've written a book before, so I've known the processes, which things have changed because my first book was published in 2017. I self-published that book as well. But this book I felt very different about because I knew exactly who I was talking to. I had a marketing plan. I had just this whole vision of how things were going to go. And then y'all, of course, 2020 hit and I had heard, I've been like, here's like, of course I'm going to share all the behind the scenes, all the backstories, but I've been a part of many book launches and I've shared that here on the podcast before. I have been part of like Dave Ramsey's organization, Ramsey Solutions. They have tons of book launches and I've been a part of ones for Rachel Cruz and Christy Wright and Chris Hogan and like all these different really big, very, very big book launches. I've done one for Ruth Sukup. I've done ones for Jamie Kern Lima. Like it's just been really fun to see behind the scenes of how people launch their books. It's not a mystery to me how things happen because I am an observer first and then I take action. And so whenever I first chose to write this book back in 2019, I actually had a plan. And I say that on multiple levels. I had a plan for who I was writing this for, why I was writing this book, and how I was going to do it. Then 2020 happened and there was a lot of questioning. There was a lot of, oh my gosh, should I keep doing this? Is this the right thing to do? And I have heard from many people, Jennifer Allwood is someone else that comes to mind. I was part of seeing a little bit behind the scenes. I wasn't part of her book launch team, but seeing what she was doing. And I remember her, when she was launching her book, talking about her editors and publishers. Everybody told her an election year is a terrible time to launch a book. And I always thought that was interesting, but then seeing how everything went down as far as like promotion and political ads and the different things that kind of happen marketing wise during an election year, you just know that like everything is saturated with, political agendas and these different things. And now I see that. I kind of was like, no, what is her editors, her people don't know what they're talking about. It's fine. But if I had to do it all over again, I don't know that I would have launched a book at the time that I did in the same circumstances. But you know what? You live, you learn, you keep on going. I will say, like right off the bat, the things that I did. So if anybody's listening and they're thinking about creating a book, writing a book, launching a book, the things that I did get me on the Amazon bestseller list for the topic that I was in. So I feel really confident in the things that I'm sharing here with you today aren't just like fluff, right? That are just like, oh, this is just behind the scenes. The things that I did actually helped me get on the Amazon bestseller list, which I had not done with my previous book. And I had never been on a bestseller list before. So that was incredible. Like in the first 48 hours, my book shot up to number 3 and number 1. It was different for paperback and for Kindle. Those were the two that I had whenever I launched the book. It is now in an audiobook form. So I'm going to have a link in the show notes. You can go to crystalprofit.com/episode 299 to learn more about the book. So it's called Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. And it's so much fun. It's so much fun. And I know that if anybody's listening and they're like, writing is not fun, I gotta agree with you on that. There are certain aspects of writing that are not fun, but it's also so rewarding when you have a physical book in your hand that you can hold and you know how much time, how much effort, how much energy you put into creating it. And I'm actually working on another book. There's a lot of ideas that I have. And I'm excited about that. So this, like, the cat's out of the bag. I'm working on another book project that we'll probably see come to fruition in 2022 or 2023. I don't have an exact date for it yet, but I just get so excited about writing now that I've been doing it for so long. It's not something that I just picked up yesterday and I'm like, oh, I have this newfound passion for writing. It's something that's developed over time. And like I said, this was my second book. And the next one I'm writing will be my third book. So I have things kind of figured out for my own processes. And of course, I'm creating so much content, it just becomes easier over time. So let me share a little bit of the behind the scenes of why I wrote this book, who it was written for. So I wrote this book for podcasters. And as you can imagine by the title, Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast. It is all about creating content that people want to come back to over and over and over again. If you've been a longtime listener of this podcast, I have put strategies into the book that have really led me to creating a loyal audience of this podcast, but also other pieces of content. So I share a lot about that in the book. But also, this book was written for not just the beginner podcasters, even though that's really who it's catered towards. It's also for people that have started a podcast and never gotten any traction with it, who is actually a good majority of my audience, which was kind of surprising to me that I've learned in the last 12 months. I thought I was just catering to brand new podcasters who, just wanted to know all the things that they weren't sure of. But there's a big subset of my audience that are actually people who are just like me, who were like, I'm going to YouTube it. I'm going to figure this out on my own. And they kind of got stuck along the way, whether it was they stopped podcasting and then they want to come back to it, or they just created a podcast. I hear this all the time. People will tell me, I created a podcast a few years ago. I didn't love it, so I stopped, but now I'm creating a different one. Or this isn't my first podcast. This is actually my second or third. And that just gets me really excited to know that there's a bunch of different people who fit into the category for this book. So it's not just start a podcast, it's start a binge-worthy podcast. And there was definitely some market research done in this. So for anybody that's thinking about creating a book, writing a book, or even just creating content in general, like that's like a really big project, highly, highly recommend either a launch team or a focus group. Like I created a launch team and it wasn't huge, right? I've been a part of launch teams. I remember when Jamie Kern-Lima, who she's the founder of It Cosmetics, she had a Facebook group that had thousands of people in there. She had a huge launch team. And I think it started about 90 days before the book was actually out into the world. And it was a little overwhelming. Like I couldn't imagine having a launch team that was that large, but she also had it wasn't, hey, help me make these decisions along the way. Her launch team was more about the promotion of the book and getting, the marketing aspect. My launch team, my book, I guess I should have called them a focus group / launch team, because I literally shared everything with them. I shared when I was writing. I shared when I sent my book off to my editor. I shared when COVID first hit and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I had just gotten the edits back from my editor. This is so vivid in my imagination because it was spring break 2020. It was the beginning of March, and my family and I, we drove up to Oklahoma. We had rented this cabin. We were like, oh, let's, go out in the woods and, just kind of disconnect from everybody. And I have a printed copy of my book that I had gotten back from my editor. I sent it to Office Depot, had it printed and bound, and had my highlighter and my red pen. And I was like, okay, I'm excited. I'm going to mark up some quotable things that I can do. And I just remember it so vividly, having everything in my hands and going through it. And then I get back from spring break and COVID hit and all these things are just up in the air. And I remember talking to my group, my team of people. I'm like, I don't know how this is all going to go down. And I think it was probably, maybe in the end, it was around 20 people, but I think in the beginning, there might have been 10 or 12 people in there. But I just shared everything because one, I wanted to document my own journey so then I could eventually turn it into content that would be helpful for other people. But I also wanted to just share my experience in case anybody had questions along the way, because that's how I learn. I learn by watching what other people do. And that was just, it was so much fun to do that. But let me go into a little bit of the behind the scenes of writing the book. So I used Asana. Asana was like my like just saving grace for keeping everything organized. And I used Asana to write out, okay, I need to write all these chapters. Here's the outline. Here's everything. And then I broke everything up by like, okay, here's your deadline. It was like, I imagined working for like with a publisher and what kind of deadlines they would give me. And so I kind of forced those deadlines upon myself, which can be frustrating for other people. Like I know my husband's like, you put all these deadlines on yourself. I'm like, well, if I don't do it, who will? So I put deadlines on myself of when I was going to launch the book. And this is actually, we're going to talk about launching in a second, but that was really important to have that date in mind, pick a launch date, and work backwards. If you've been around here, I talk about this with podcasting, and this works for anything. If you're launching a course, if you're doing a promotional launch, whatever you're doing, you've got to have that deadline date in mind and then work backwards from there. So that's what I did. I was like, okay, this is when I'm going to launch the book. I'm going to work backwards. When do I need to have this chapter done and this chapter done? When do I need to have it edited and formatted and ready to go and the cover done and the audiobook? Like there were so many things that I knew that needed to happen because like I said, this wasn't my first book. I had a game plan. I knew how I wanted to approach this. So I used Asana. This is my project management tool. I've talked very extensively on this podcast on YouTube about how I use Asana in different aspects of my business, but definitely recommend if you're going to be writing a book to have some kind of project management tool that will help you stay organized and keep everything like squared away. And then from there, I worked on my chapter outlines, which I started with existing pieces of content, y'all. It's no secret. If you go and read my book, I'm not sharing things in there that you probably haven't heard in podcast episodes. If you're a profit podcasting student, there's a good chance that there's an overlap there. If you've watched my YouTube videos, a lot of it is there. It's not brand new, groundbreaking information, but the difference is I have infused stories into the mix. So that is how you take something that is like a how-to piece of content or something that's very step-by-step. Like y'all, me telling you how to connect your podcast to Buzzsprout to use as your hosting site, that is so mundane. It's just like step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3. But the way that you kind of spice it up to where it's interesting to other people is by telling stories. I mean, that's even just listening to this podcast episode right now. Isn't it so much more interesting that you knew our family was going to Oklahoma and we were going to go in the woods and like disconnect from everybody? That sounds so much more interesting than, oh, I got my edits back from my editor and I decided to do my edits. Oh my gosh, no, you've got to infuse story. Like that is what we are doing as podcasters, as content creators. We are storytelling. It is like, I mean, if we had like a job description for what we do, this is what we're doing. We are telling stories. So if you're going to be writing a book, just know that that comes with the territory and that's the way that you can differentiate yourself. So let's like back up for a second and pretend we're not even talking about writing a book. We're talking about creating content in general. You've got to figure out a way to infuse stories into your podcast, into your emails, into your social media, whatever it is. You've got to do this in order to make things interesting. So that's a little behind the scenes of actually writing the book, then launching the book. Okay, so launching the book was something I was very confident about because like I said, I'd been a part of many, many book launches. And I knew that the first thing I needed to do, this was back in September. Like I said, September 2019, I knew the first thing I needed to do was look ahead and ask myself, what is realistic? When can I get this book launched based on my previous experiences? And how much time can I give myself to actually make this happen? So I gave myself 13 months. And you may ask, well, why not 6 months? Why not 2 years? Like why that amount of time? Well, for me, I know that I like to launch things that are going to give me enough white space to not stress me out. I know this about myself now. Previously, I would have said, oh yeah, sure. And I could have done this. I could have done this in 6 months' time. But I also know that sharing the journey and showing my audience is 100% why this book landed on a bestseller list, because I got to talk about it for a year. I got to share the behind the scenes on Instagram. I got to talk to my book launch team. I got to share like, hey, we nailed down the title of the book. Hey, I just got back my edits from my editor. We just landed on the artwork that's going to be the book. Like I got to start sharing quotables way early. Like I actually finished the formatted, edited version of the book probably about 5 months before it was ready to be published. And the reason why I say that is because the marketing, if you are trying to actually sell your book, it's different if you're just writing to have like a cathartic experience and you just want to have your book, like your name on a printed book, which was kind of the reason why I wrote my very first one. If I'm being really honest, I just wanted to see my name on a book because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a dream of mine. But to actually have the goal of, I want to have this book shared. I want it to impact people. I want it to help other podcasters. I knew that I needed to talk about it. Writing the book is just the beginning. Like quote that. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that. I'm sure a very famous author already said that. But writing the book is just the beginning, because even if you go the traditional route of publishing or you go self-published, you have to be able to market the thing. You have to be able to talk about it. So when I picked this launch date, which I launched on October 20th, 2020, so the launch date was 10/20/2020, y'all, it was easy for me to say. I knew I wanted to launch on a Tuesday because that's when a lot of other books launch. I was like, hey, it just felt right. So I launched on a Tuesday, 10/20/2020, but it was so easy for me to remember. So even starting in January 2020, I started telling people like, oh, it's coming in October, just be ready for it. Even if I didn't have the exact date nailed down, I could start telling people when it was coming. So that anticipation starts building. And then over time, it's like a snowball. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then to where people are excited. Like you tell them in October, they're like, oh, just a few more weeks and the book will be here. And people know about it. I think that a lot of people are under the misconception the way marketing works is you keep everything a secret. It's a secret. It's a secret. And then you come out and you're like, with all the fireworks and the things, it's like a big thing. And then you're like, why is nobody here?
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants.
Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Well, no one probably knew about it. So my philosophy is you share the messy middle. You tell people when things go wrong. And I mean, I had so many things that really kind of fell to pieces along the way. And it was kind of a disaster. Like I thought my audiobook was going to be ready when I released everything else, and it wasn't. I had issues with getting the files formatted correctly, and then I went back and forth with Audible trying to get everything uploaded, and it was kind of crazy. And there for a while, I thought, well, I'm just going to have to release this as its own podcast. And it wasn't until 6 months after the original book was published that I finally got on Audible. And I felt like I had lied to my audience. I felt like I had lied to y'all because I said, oh, it's going to be a free podcast. And then a few days later, I look and I got a check from Audible and I'm like, what is this? Someone had bought my book on Audible because it was out there. So it was just this whole mess, this like disaster situation that I now know what the parameters are to create a book on Audible. I learned so many things in that process that I will know going into another book what needs to happen, how I can avoid these mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, the other thing that I know I will outsource in the future is formatting. So in my very first book, I asked my husband's grandmother, who's no longer with us, but it's so special that I have her handwritten notes from the first book I ever wrote. And that's just so special to me. And I will forever cherish her little scribbles and the little things that she wrote along the way, because, oh my gosh, like how awesome is that? How precious is that to have? And then I also had my sister-in-law, who is a technical writer, like contract writer, and she reads a ton. She goes to writing classes and she has just done so many things in the writing space herself. And I was just so excited that both of them helped me with editing. But I knew that I wanted to outsource that when I wrote this book. So that was the first thing I did. It was like, okay, I'm going to write this book. I've got to find an editor. So that's what I did. I found an editor and I knew that, okay, if I'm going to write this book, I'm going to pass off the edits to her at this point. But then when I got everything back, first of all, shout out to Sarah at Ink Droplet. Like, she is so amazing. And I'm so grateful for all the things that she did. I'm going to link to her in the show notes. So KristaProfit.com/episode 299. She's the editor I used. So incredible. But when I got her edits back, I was like, okay, now we're ready to rock and roll. You know, I got to have my own like creative, like, okay, I love this. I want to change this. And we kind of went back and forth on where we could make things a lot easier. By the way, while we're talking about editing, here's another tip for you writers. Don't write the whole book and then send it to an editor. I did that. I wish I would have wrote a chapter, sent it to an editor, wrote a chapter, sent it to an editor, wrote a chapter, sent it to an editor. That way you have time to kind of process what you wrote after the fact. What I did was too much space between when I wrote the thing and when I got it back from her. I thought I would like that big gap because basically I sent it to her at the beginning of February. I got it back at the beginning of March. And I wish I would have sent her a chapter at a time and gotten it back instead of the whole manuscript at once. I don't know, maybe, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here, but that's kind of what I thought is maybe next time in my next book, I would go chapter to chapter as opposed to the entire book at one time. But I know that I need to outsource my editing. If I'm going to self-publish another book, which my next book, I'm hoping to have a traditional publishing deal. That's like my vibes. I'm putting it out there. I'm manifesting it. You know, it's coming. It's going to come out into the universe. But I definitely want to do none of the formatting. I don't want to do any of the formatting because, y'all, if you look at the book, and you're like, wow, Crystal's book looks really good, I will take that as a compliment. I will take it because that was frustrating. When I go back to writing the book as just the beginning, yeah, you got to worry about all the marketing, all the other things. You also have to make a lot of decisions if you're self-publishing. You have to decide what type of font are you going to use? What type of margins are you going to have? Are you going to have either bold or italicized? What kind of headings? Like all these things that you don't really think about. And you kind of just think, oh, well, people somewhere else will make those decisions. Not when you're self-publishing. Those are your decisions to make. And it's kind of frustrating when you're like, I just want it to be done. And you do the what is it? Like the author's edition, you know, the preprint, you go and you have the first draft of your book done and you get it back and you're like, this looks awful. This looks terrible. Like, no, I would never want it to be printed this way. So you go back to the drawing board and you do it again and you do it again. I don't want to do that next time. I want to outsource my editing and my formatting and not have to do that. But these are things that you learn along the way, right? Like if you're thinking about writing a book, then I encourage you to do your own the very first time. Self-publish a book, even if it's a short book. It doesn't have to be 300 pages. It doesn't have to be 200 pages. Like it could be a very small book, but I definitely recommend trying things out first, because just like with launching a podcast, just like with launching a course, launching anything else, you learn so much along the way. And as I go into writing this next book, I'm just leaps and bounds above where I was the very first book that I wrote. So just know it gets easier every time you do something that is a repetition of something you've already done, which is why I tell people, just start your podcast. You're going to get here we are. We're almost at episode 300, and I feel so much more confident talking to you, knowing exactly what my content's going to be, knowing exactly what to say than I did in my very first episode. It's all about repetition and consistency and just showing up time and time again. So I know that today's episode was a little bit different, but I wanted to celebrate Start a Binge-Worthy Podcast because I'm so proud of this book. You can get it on Amazon. You can download it on Audible. And I would love it if you would support this book baby of mine because it was so much fun to create. So again, you can go to the show notes, crystalprofit.com/episode 299 to figure out how to buy it and which format's going to work best for you. But that's all I have for you today. So if this is your first time tuning in, make sure you hit that subscribe, follow button. If you're thinking about writing a book, please take a screenshot of this episode. Wherever you're listening, tag me on social media and tell me your book idea. Tell me what you're thinking about creating, because I love seeing everybody's creative ideas and the things that get them excited. But that's all I have for you today. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners, thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.